In April 2019, what seemed like a kind act for a young mother accepting free baby clothes from a stranger she met online led to one of the most shocking crimes in Chicago. 19-year-old Marlene Ochoa Lopez, 9 months pregnant with her second child, walked into a house in the Scottsdale neighborhood and never walked out again. From the outside, the home looked ordinary. Inside, it concealed a horrifying trap. This was not just the tragedy of one family. It became a mirror reflecting society itself. Neighbors who noticed strange behavior but chose silence, agencies that reacted too slowly, and an online community where trust was exploited instead of protected. Every silence, every hesitation, became another link in the chain that led to Marlene's death. I need to be clear from the beginning, this is not an easy story to hear. We will not dwell on graphic details, but the failures it reveals are too real, too painful to ignore. Marlene's death did not come only at the hands of her attackers, but also from the gaps in the systems and communities that allowed danger to unfold in plain sight. And that is why retelling this story is necessary, not only to honor a young mother and the child who never had the chance to grow, but to remind us that prevention begins with awareness, with our choice to question, to speak out, and to act. Because as Marlene's story shows, silence can sometimes be as destructive as violence itself. Chicago, early 2019. On a quiet neighborhood street, people grew familiar with the sight of a young woman, her belly heavy with pregnancy, patiently holding the hand of her 3-year-old son. Day after day, Marlene Ochoa Lopez walked him to school. It was an image of ordinary life, the kind no one pays much attention to. Yet, in hindsight, it became haunting, because only a few months later, that same young woman would become the focus of one of Chicago's most shocking crimes. At just 19 years old, Marlene was living a life far beyond her years. She was still a high school student, but also a wife, and already a devoted mother. While her friends were preoccupied with exams and future plans, Marlene was focused on building a safe home for her family. She was remembered by friends for her clear, warm singing voice in the church choir. Neighbors recalled her radiant smile and gentle brown eyes. In the small apartment she shared with her family, she often sat at her sewing machine, stitching clothes for her son, Joshua. To her mother, she was an angel who brought joy. To her father, every video call ended with Marlene pressing her pregnant belly to the screen and whispering, "I'm so happy, Dad." But beneath this brightness were unseen gaps. Her parents' divorce had left her without the wider family support many young mothers relied on. Marlene often had to stand on her own. Seeking community, she turned to the internet online groups where mothers donated and exchanged baby items. For her, it was a simple way to prepare for her second child. What she didn't realize was that this trust, innocent and unguarded, opened the door to danger. On social media, anyone can create a perfect mask, and Marlene, believing in the kindness of strangers, stepped through an invisible doorway. That doorway would lead to a story almost too cruel to believe. A story that forces us to ask, can a gesture of kindness hide a deadly trap? In the early months of 2019, within Chicago's online Facebook groups for young mothers, where hundreds of posts offered strollers, baby clothes, or bottles, a single name began to stand out: Clarissa Figueroa. At 46 years old, Clarissa suddenly announced she was pregnant. She even posted ultrasound images as undeniable proof. At first, it seemed like a piece of good news, but if you connect the details, something unsettling emerges. Just months earlier, Clarissa had lost her adult son, a devastating loss for any mother. And yet, almost immediately, she returned to social media, presenting herself as expectant and cheerful, even unnaturally enthusiastic. Medically, a pregnancy at her age isn't impossible, but it's rare and risky. In a close-knit community, this should have raised questions: was something not right? But online, skepticism gave way to an avalanche of well-meaning congratulations. Clarissa didn't just post occasionally, she was everywhere. Every day came new posts giving away or asking for baby items, chatting, offering help. She built a facade of kindness and reliability, so consistent that suspicion seemed unnecessary. And from behind that facade, she began reaching out to struggling young mothers, including Marlene Ochoa Lopez. On April 1st, 2019, Marlene visited Clarissa's home for the first time. On the surface, nothing seemed out of place, yet neighbors later remembered Clarissa's behavior as strangely tense and rushed. Even her boyfriend, Piotr Bobak, grew uneasy. He reportedly muttered warnings that Clarissa should not do something reckless. That hesitation, his discomfort against her insistence, became a temporary break, allowing Marlene to leave unharmed that day. But the questions linger. If Bobak truly sensed danger, why didn't he act? Why didn't he call the police? That moment might have been the turning point to stop what was coming. Instead, silence prevailed. And in situations like this, silence is never neutral. It becomes a form of complicity, an invisible permission for danger to continue. Meanwhile, Marlene spoke to her family about the kind woman giving her baby items. But, strangely, she kept the visit secret from her husband, perhaps to avoid causing worry. Experts later described this as a hallmark of manipulation. Predators create a sense of exclusivity, making victims feel special, while planting the idea that the relationship should remain private. This was the most dangerous gap between natural caution and the fear of appearing ungrateful. In the world of social media, where anyone can craft a perfect mask, even the simplest safety measures, meeting in public, bringing a companion, verifying details, could mean the difference between safety and disaster. But Marlene, young and trusting in kindness, never asked those questions, and so the warning bells that had already begun to ring faded into silence. After April 1st, subtle changes began inside the small Scottsdale home in Chicago. On the porch, neighbors noticed deliveries arriving, boxes of baby clothes, diapers, bottles. Inside, what had once been a spare room slowly transformed into a fully furnished nursery, a wooden crib, soft blankets, neatly folded onesies, all of it prepared for the arrival of a baby no one had ever actually seen proof of. Behind it all was Clarissa Figueroa. On social media, she posted ultrasound pictures and cheerful updates about her pregnancy. To many, it looked like a story of late-in-life joy, but to anyone looking closely, it felt rehearsed. This was a woman who had just buried her grown son, yet she now spoke of a happy pregnancy as if the grief had never existed. Too seamless, too perfect, almost artificial. Inside that house, Clarissa's daughter, Desiree, watched the transformation unfold. At first, she questioned it, but "Mom, you're not really pregnant, are you?" The answer was cold, sharp. "You don't need to understand. You just need to listen." From doubt, Desiree slid into silence. She had grown up under the weight of her mother's control, where loyalty was demanded, and questioning meant betrayal. In that environment, resistance didn't just risk conflict, it threatened the only bond she felt she had left. Silence replaced protest, and then silence turned into obedience, not because she believed, but because fear and blood ties bound her. That was the turning point. Experts often warn when manipulation comes from within a family. The danger is greater than from strangers. A predator doesn't need force when they can wield loyalty, fear, and the need for love as their weapons. Meanwhile, on the other side of this equation, Marlene began to sense something was off. Friends recalled how she hesitated when speaking about her next visit to the kind woman. But almost immediately, she reassured herself, "I can't say no to someone being so generous." That internal tug of war between instinctive caution and the fear of appearing ungrateful created the most dangerous space of all. It is in those moments, when politeness overrides survival instinct, that predators thrive. And so, on April the 23rd, Marlene returned to Clarissa's home. It would be her final visit, the last step into a trap carefully set long before. Here, the haunting question remains: how many times do we ignore the alarm bells in our own minds, simply because we don't want to offend? How often does courtesy become the mask that hides danger for Marlene? The instant she brushed aside that instinct, the door of fate closed behind her. On April 23rd, 2019, Marlene left home for what she believed would be a final, generous visit, but that night, she did not return. For her husband, Yovanny, it took only an hour to realize something was wrong. His wife was 9 months pregnant. She would never simply disappear without a word. Desperate, he rushed to the police station, pleading for help, but the response was chilling in its indifference. "You'll need to wait 24 hours before filing a missing persons report." A rule designed for ordinary cases, but meaningless here. For a woman about to give birth, every hour mattered. To wait was to risk losing both mother and child. In that moment, the very system meant to protect seemed to close its doors, leaving a young husband alone in his fear. This was a dangerous turning point, not just a failure of procedure, but a failure of empathy. In those first crucial days, Marlene's family was forced to take on the role authorities would not. They printed flyers, organized vigils, and reached out to the community, and the Latino community of Chicago responded. They knew one of their own was in danger, and they refused to stay silent. Yet alongside this wave of solidarity came another, darker current, online. Voices asked cold questions. Why would she meet a stranger? Why trust free baby clothes? As if Marlene's trust, not her killer's deception, was the real crime. That culture of victim blaming cut deep, not only compounding the family's grief, but spreading fear to other young mothers, making them hesitate to ask for help when they might need it most. Meanwhile, the clues were already there. Marlene's car received a parking ticket near Clarissa's home. Her phone activity stopped at that very address. Facebook messages documented the scheduled meeting, but these fragments sat in different systems' police records, city logs, social media data. No one put them together. And that is why community pressure became vital. It was the spotlight that illuminated what officials overlooked. The voice that insisted silence was not an option. In cases like these, persistence from loved ones and neighbors is sometimes the only barrier between a missing person and a tragedy that can no longer be undone. On the afternoon of April 23, 2019, a 19-year-old woman, 9 months pregnant, stepped into a small home in Chicago's Scottsdale neighborhood. For Marlene Ochoa Lopez, it was meant to be a quick stop to pick up baby clothes. In reality, she had just entered a space meticulously prepared as a trap. Once the door closed behind her, the atmosphere inside began shifting into something far darker than she could have imagined. Before we go further into what happened that afternoon, I want to pause if you're watching this. Remember, stories like these are not told to dwell on horror, but to remind us to be more cautious with the world around us. Share this story, reflect on it, and don't hesitate to pass it on to someone who may need to hear it. Because the lesson is clear, sometimes kindness, politeness, or the fear of offending others can open the door to danger. And that danger doesn't always come from strangers. It can come from those who seem friendly, generous, even trustworthy. Inside the living room, Clarissa Figueroa greeted Marlene with a warm smile, sat her down, and pulled out an old photo album. She showed pictures of her deceased son, a story crafted to spark sympathy. In that moment, Marlene softened, a young mother, still in school, just weeks from giving birth. She was moved by another woman's grief. She didn't realize this was the first step in lowering her guard. And then, when the atmosphere seemed safe, Clarissa acted. A cord tightened from behind, shattering the stillness of the room. Marlene panicked, her survival instinct flaring. Despite the weight of her pregnancy, she fought back, desperate to protect both herself and the baby she carried. Later, forensic experts would record defensive wounds, scratches, bruises, the final evidence of her desperate struggle. But she was not facing one person alone. Desiree, Clarissa's 24-year-old daughter, was there. At first, she hesitated, but when her mother barked an order, she stepped forward, helping to restrain Marlene. It was a tragic turning point, the moment when fear and family loyalty transformed Desiree into an accomplice. From that instant, the balance shifted irreversibly. The most disturbing part came next. Driven by a delusional obsession with having a new child, Clarissa attempted a crude, at-home procedure, without medical training, without proper equipment, only desperation and obsession. The baby boy, Yovanny Jadiel, was taken from Marlene's body alive, but deprived of oxygen for too long. Weeks later, he passed away from irreversible brain damage. In the sterile language of medical reports, the tragedy was reduced to phrases like cause of death, mechanical asphyxiation, defensive wounds on forearm, hypoxic brain injury, but behind every cold term was unmeasurable pain, a young mother who fought until her final breath, and a newborn who never had the chance to open his eyes to the world. And here lies the haunting question: if, on April 1st, Piotr Bobak, Clarissa's boyfriend, had actually called police, would Marlene still be alive? If neighbors had raised alarms about the nursery being prepared under suspicious circumstances, could the tragedy have been stopped? If the Facebook group had required stronger verification, would Marlene ever have walked into that house? Each what if is not just speculation, it is a lesson written in blood. A reminder that silence and indifference can be just as deadly as the crime itself. When Clarissa Figueroa dialed 911 that afternoon, she claimed she had just given birth at home, but almost immediately, medical staff and the on-call physician noticed something was wrong. The 46-year-old woman's body bore none of the expected signs of childbirth, no bleeding, no trauma, no biological evidence at all. The contradiction was glaring, and yet, instead of raising immediate alarm, suspicion was buried beneath the layers of bureaucracy. It would take more than 2 weeks before that information finally reached the right authorities. 2 weeks' time that could have made all the difference in uncovering the truth sooner. Meanwhile, clues surrounding Marlene's disappearance were already present. Facebook messages documented the planned meeting to pick up baby items. GPS data from her phone pinpointed her last known location inside the Figueroa home. Her car was abandoned just blocks away, accumulating parking tickets. But these pieces of evidence were scattered across different systems: law enforcement, city records, social media platforms. All it would have taken was someone to connect them. The answer was hiding in plain sight. The turning point came only when Marlene's family, desperate for answers, personally brought detectives screenshots of her Facebook messages with Clarissa. With that, investigators finally had probable cause to request a search warrant. On May 14, 2019, 3 weeks after Marlene vanished, police entered the Scottsdale residence. What they discovered confirmed the family's worst fears. In the backyard, inside a large trash bin, lay Marlene's body, a cord still wrapped around her neck. DNA results erased any doubt the infant Clarissa had claimed as her own premature son was in fact Yovanny Jadiel Lopez, Marlene's baby boy. As detectives dug deeper, an elaborate cover-up unraveled. Clarissa had set up a GoFundMe page, seeking donations for the sick newborn. She introduced the child to friends at the hospital, presenting him as her own. On social media, she posted updates about her new life with the baby. It was a deception carefully staged, but one that relied on a dangerous assumption that no one would be bold enough to question her. And here, a sobering lesson emerges. We often believe that something so outrageous simply could not happen, that if something were truly wrong, someone else would surely step in. But in this case, collective silence allowed the tragedy to unfold. Medical staff suspected, but delayed reporting. Neighbors noticed oddities, but said nothing. Social media let lies circulate without verification. Each small silence added up until an entire community lost its chance to save a life. The courtroom became a mirror, exposing the full scope of the horror. Before the jury, Clarissa Figueroa was no longer the kind mother from Facebook groups. She stood revealed as the architect of a plan weeks in the making. Prosecutors presented an avalanche of evidence: fabricated pregnancy posts, online searches for how to perform a C-section, and the very messages that lured Marlene to her fate. Piece by piece, it was clear this was no crime of passion, but a cold, calculated scheme. Any suggestion of diminished responsibility was stripped away. But the deepest tension of the trial came not from Clarissa, but from the key witness, her daughter, Desiree Figueroa. At 24, Desiree faced charges for physically restraining Marlene in her final moments. The law saw her as a culpable adult, yet her testimony revealed a far more complex reality. Raised under her mother's iron grip, manipulated by emotional control, and the mantra that family is everything, she described her role as reluctant, haunted by what happened. Her decision to testify against her mother became a legal turning point. In the end, Desiree was sentenced to 30 years in prison, a verdict that sparked debate. Where is the line between willing accomplice and manipulated victim? Then came the name Piotr Bobak, Clarissa's boyfriend. He was not present during the killing, but he knew the plan. He heard the threats, and he chose silence. Later, he even helped cover up the crime and joined Clarissa in launching a fraudulent GoFundMe page for the so-called premature baby. For that, Bobak received 4 years in prison and deportation. The sentence ignited outrage. How could a man who held the power to save 2 lives with a single phone call receive such a light punishment? The trial reached its emotional peak when the victim's family addressed the court. Yovanny Lopez, who had lost both his wife and his newborn son, stood before the judge, clutching his most painful memory. He described the moment he had to decide to withdraw life support from baby Yovanny Jadiel, the infant who never had a chance to recover from his brain injuries. The memory of my son's final breath in my arms. It's unbearable, he said, voice breaking, his sunflower-printed shirt a vivid tribute to Marlene. Behind him, Raquel Uriostegui, Marlene's mother, wept as she spoke of another wound, the feeling of abandonment by the very system meant to protect her daughter. They treated us as if we didn't matter. My daughter went missing, 9 months pregnant, and still the police told us to wait. Maybe because we're immigrants. Her words echoed through the courtroom not just as grief, but as an indictment of a system too slow, too indifferent, to protect the most vulnerable. The case of Marlene Ochoa Lopez held up a mirror to the deadly cracks within multiple systems. Every delay, every rigid protocol, was not just a technical misstep, it became a link in the chain that pushed a young mother and her unborn child toward tragedy. From the very beginning, the handling of Marlene's disappearance revealed the problem. Her desperate husband, Yovanny, begged police for help. His wife was 9 months pregnant, and she was missing. Yet the only response he received was, "You need to wait 24 hours." What might be a routine policy in other cases was utterly meaningless here. For pregnant women, small children, or anyone with urgent medical needs, every passing hour can be the difference between life and death. Still, the system made no distinction. Marlene's car was ticketed repeatedly just blocks from Clarissa's home, yet no one connected that data to her missing persons report. This wasn't about advanced technology, it was about basic coordination that could have saved a life. The failures didn't stop with law enforcement. The healthcare system also faltered. On the day Clarissa brought the newborn to the hospital, doctors immediately noticed something was wrong. The 46-year-old woman showed no signs of having just given birth. No bleeding, no trauma, no biological evidence. The contradiction was glaring. Yet, instead of sounding the alarm, the red flags were buried under paperwork, liability fears, and bureaucratic caution. It would take more than 2 weeks before those suspicions reached investigators. In that time, Marlene's family was left in torment. While Clarissa continued to stage her elaborate deception, this wasn't just delay, it was a system more concerned with protecting itself than protecting vulnerable mothers and children. And then, there was the online world where it all began. The Facebook group Help a Mother Out operated as a goodwill community, but with no verification processes whatsoever. Anyone could pose as a parent, arrange face-to-face exchanges, and lure young mothers with the promise of baby supplies. No checks, no warnings. Facebook profited from the activity of these groups, but bore no responsibility for safety. Simple features verified admin profiles, alerts when arranging in-person meetings, or built-in identity checks could have been implemented. They were not. And Marlene, like thousands of other mothers, walked into a trap without knowing it. Perhaps most troubling of all, however, was not the system, but the silence of individuals. Piotr Bobak knew the plan, yet stayed quiet. Neighbors noticed a nursery being set up under suspicious circumstances, but no one reported it. Hospital staff suspected something, yet followed a slow reporting chain instead of raising immediate alarms. The cultural reflex of not getting involved, so deeply rooted in many communities, became fertile ground for predators. The truth is stark in these cases. Silence is never neutral. Silence is complicity. And that is where the lesson must be driven home. Institutional loopholes can be patched with new laws and new protocols, but human indifference can only change when individuals realize that speaking up, reporting, and acting may be the thin line between life and death. In a society where predators exploit every blind spot, communities themselves must become the first line of defense. When the trial ended, Chicago was left not only mourning the loss of a young mother, but also facing a harder question. How do you turn grief into action out of tragedy? The community began building its own forms of protection. Lawmakers introduced what became known as Marlene's Law, a measure requiring hospitals to verify the identity of anyone claiming to have just given birth, and to immediately notify police if inconsistencies arise. Some critics worried such measures could complicate legitimate home births or surrogacy cases. But for those who lived through the case, the answer was clear. One simple step of verification could have saved Marlene and her unborn child. The response went far beyond the legislative halls. Churches began hosting workshops on recognizing online red flags. Community centers launched buddy programs so that parents never had to meet strangers from online groups alone. Across the Pilsen neighborhood, murals of Marlene surrounded by her favorite sunflowers appeared not only as memorials, but as public forums, where volunteers used them to spark conversations about safety and vigilance. Inside institutions, Self-reflection also took hold. The Chicago Police Department updated its missing person protocols, creating a rapid response team for high-risk cases. At Advocate Christ Medical Center, where baby Yovanny had been treated, new training was introduced when there's any suspicion of newborn abduction. Staff must report immediately, no waiting, no hiding behind red tape. These reforms came too late for Marlene, but they marked the first steps toward preventing future tragedies. Yet perhaps the most powerful change was not in laws or policies, but in individuals. In parenting groups online, the phrase "Remember Marlene" became a quiet code, a reminder to double-check, to verify, and never to go alone. This small shift, echoing through thousands of everyday conversations, may well be the most enduring legacy of the 19-year-old mother whose life was stolen too soon. 5 years later, the story of Marlene Ochoa Lopez has not faded. Across national forums, her case is still raised in debates about the legal responsibility of social media. Facebook has since added verification measures, but critics argue they remain insufficient to truly protect users. The lingering question remains, should platforms be held accountable when their tools become conduits for crime? For Marlene's family, grief has become action. Joshua, the 3-year-old boy who lost his mother, has grown into an 8-year-old in the care of relatives. He carries both the scars of loss and the symbolic weight of why this fight continues. Every year on April 23rd, the family holds a vigil, handing out flyers at maternity clinics, reminding young mothers of the risks of meeting strangers. Remembrance and prevention now walk hand in hand. The ripple effects extend far beyond their community. Medical schools, police academies, and social work programs have incorporated Marlene's case into training. Future doctors are taught that clinical instinct must sometimes outweigh paperwork. New police recruits learn that rigid protocol can cost lives. Social workers are trained to spot isolation, the very vulnerability predators often exploit. Later studies revealed a sobering truth. Pregnant women are uniquely targeted because of a perfect storm of vulnerability, physical strain, emotional sensitivity, and the natural search for support. Yet, healthcare systems rarely address safety education for expectant mothers. That gap between vulnerability and preparation has been exposed as a public health failure demanding urgent reform. The story of Marlene Ochoa Lopez is not just a criminal case. It is a mirror reflecting the assumptions we too often take for granted, that a young mother can safely trust another mother, that police will act swiftly when someone goes missing, that doctors will escalate suspicions without hesitation. In Marlene's case, each of those beliefs was broken. Her death was not fate. It was the result of silence, delays, and the dangerous assumption that someone else will act. The lesson is stark: prevention does not require heroes. It requires ordinary people willing to speak, to report, to act in the moment. Today, sunflowers bloom across Chicago's brick walls, Marlene's favorite flower. They stand not only in remembrance, but as reminders. When you see something unusual, speak up. When the system lags, demand change. Be the voice Marlene can no longer raise. Somewhere right now, another young mother may be considering meeting a kind stranger online. Somewhere, a healthcare worker may notice a red flag but feel restrained by protocol. Somewhere, a neighbor may hesitate at something odd behind closed doors. We cannot bring back Marlene and baby Yovanny, but we can ensure their deaths are not in vain. Every warning spoken, every timely action, every life saved, that is how we continue their story. Not with loss, but with life.